The elevator doors opened at 2:13 in the morning, and Elena Voss realized she had already lost. He didn't announce himself. Dante Moretti simply walked into her apartment like he owned the building, the block, the entire city, because in every way that mattered, he did. 6 men had surrounded the exits before she'd even heard the first gunshot outside. The lights cut out 30 seconds later, and now he stood in her kitchen under the pale glow of his soldier's flashlight, setting a document on her table with the careful precision of a man who had never once been told no. Elena looked at the paper. Her brother's signature. $8 million. A debt she never knew existed. 72 hours, Dante said. His voice was flat. No threat in it. That was somehow worse. She told him she had nothing. He told her Julian hadn't borrowed the money. He'd stolen it. And the money belonged to Dante's most dangerous enemy. If you've ever been handed someone else's destruction and told to carry it yourself, stay with me. Because this story is just getting started. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about that night was an accident. Elena had spent 3 years learning to sleep through sirens. That was the thing about living in the Caldwell district. You either adapted or you moved, and she couldn't afford to move. Not on a forensic accountant's salary, not with Julian's tuition loans still bleeding through her savings every month, not with the lease she'd signed in a moment of stubborn optimism 18 months ago when she'd told herself things were finally stabilizing. They were not stabilizing, but she'd learned the city's rhythms. The 11 p.m. garbage trucks on Meridian. The domestic argument on the 4th floor that always peaked around midnight and always died before 1 a. The occasional pop of something that might be a firecracker, or might not be, echoing off the concrete walls of a neighborhood that had long since stopped pretending it was safe. So when 3 shots cracked the air at 2:13 in the morning, precise and evenly spaced, she was already half awake, already sitting up, already feeling the wrongness of it in her chest before her brain caught up. These weren't random. These were a signal. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. No signal. She crossed the bedroom, pressed her face close to the window without touching the glass, the way her father had taught her once. Years ago, in a moment of paranoia, she'd dismissed as eccentricity. She wasn't dismissing it now. The black Cezanne was parked directly under the street lamp, not hidden, deliberately visible. The kind of statement that didn't need words. 2 men stood on the sidewalk in front of her building's entrance. 2 more at the alley on the east side. She moved to the living room window. 2 more there. 6 men. All of them still. All of them waiting. The elevator hummed to life. Elena backed away from the window. She thought about the kitchen, the back stairs, the fire escape. She was calculating, because calculating was what she did, was the only thing she'd ever been truly good at. The way her brain automatically sorted numbers and patterns and discrepancies, the way most people sorted laundry, and every calculation came back wrong. There was nowhere to go. The elevator stopped on her floor. She heard the doors open. She heard footsteps, 1 pair, unhurried, and then a knock at her door that was so polite it turned her stomach. She opened it because not opening it felt more dangerous. Dante Moretti was not what she'd expected, and she couldn't have explained why she'd expected anything at all. She knew the name. Everyone in this city who read past the front page knew the name. Moretti, the kind of man who existed in rumor and in the fine print of police, reports that never led anywhere. She'd imagined something larger, something louder. He was tall, lean in the way that suggested controlled discipline rather than vanity. Dark suit, no tie, collar open. His face was the kind that didn't give anything away, not cruelty, not warmth, not even particular interest. He looked at her the way someone looks at a piece of machinery they're assessing for functionality. Not threatening, just measuring. 2 men flanked him in the hallway. He raised one hand slightly, and they stopped where they were. Stepped inside alone. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I apologize for the hour." She almost laughed. The sound died somewhere in her throat. He moved to her kitchen table the way a man moves through a room he's already memorized, set a manila folder down, and slid it toward her side of the table without opening it. "Your brother owes me $8 million, he said. "The contract is inside. His signature, 2 witnesses. Terms are standard. Elena didn't touch the folder. Julian's a graduate student. He doesn't have $8 million. No, Dante agreed, he doesn't. She looked at him. Then what is this? A conversation. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, which somehow felt more threatening than if he'd remained standing, as if he planned to stay, as if he had all the time in the world and fully intended to use it. You have 72 hours to repay the debt. I just told you. I heard you. He wasn't dismissive. He was patient in a way that suggested he'd already played out this exchange in his head. There's an alternative. I'm not interested in your alternatives. He looked at her steadily. You will be. Elena pulled the folder toward her. She opened it. Julian's signature was unmistakable. She'd watched him sign his name 10,000 times, knew the particular way he dropped the J, the loop he never quite closed on the V. It was him. It was absolutely him. $8 million. The date was 4 months ago. The terms were formal, legal-looking, chilling in their ordinary language, as if it were a mortgage. He borrowed this from you, she said. No. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not much. Just enough. He stole it. The room felt colder. What do you mean he stole it? I mean that Julian Voss did not negotiate alone. He created a set of documents, accessed a financial system he should not have had access to, and moved $8 million through 4 shell accounts over the course of 6 weeks. Dante said it plainly, as if reading a weather report. He is, it appears, considerably more resourceful than most people realize. Elena sat down. She hadn't decided to. Her legs just stopped holding her. Where is he, she said. That, Dante said, is the question, because Julian was gone. She'd known. Something was wrong when he'd stopped returning her calls 5 days ago. She'd told herself he was overwhelmed with finals, with his thesis, with the particular withdrawal that overtook him sometimes when the pressure built. She'd left 3 voicemails. She'd texted 17 times. She'd called his roommate, who said Julian had cleared out his things 2 weeks ago and hadn't given a forwarding address. She'd been trying not to know what she was beginning to know. He ran, she said. It appears so. Then go find him. This has nothing to do with me. Dante studied her. The money he stole didn't belong to me, Ms. Voss. It belonged to a man named Victor Salazar. I was holding it in a transfer account as part of a business arrangement. Julian accessed that account. He paused. Victor knows who moved the money. He knows Julian Voss. And he is not a man who distinguishes carefully between Julian Voss and Julian Voss's family. The silence stretched between them. You're saying I'm in danger, Elena said. I'm saying you're already in danger. The only question is what form of protection you want. And you're offering protection. Her voice came out more bitter than she'd intended. I'm offering a transaction, he said. You work for me. Your expertise. I've done considerable research, Ms. Voss is in identifying fraudulent financial structures. I have use for that skill. You work until the debt is cleared. When it's cleared, you leave. Victor will not touch you while you're under my arrangement. That's not protection. That's a different kind of captivity. Yes, he said simply. He didn't pretend otherwise. She almost respected it. And if I say no, Dante stood. He buttoned his jacket, one button, unhurried, and picked up his phone from the table where he'd set it without her noticing. Turned it to face her. The screen showed a live feed. Her brother's apartment building. The roommate's unit. Lights on. Someone moving behind the curtains. Victor's people have been watching that building for 4 days, Dante said. They're looking for Julian. When they decide Julian isn't coming back, they'll start looking for anyone Julian cared about. He set the phone down. You have until Friday night to decide. Someone will contact you. He moved toward the door. Wait, Elena said. She hated that she said it. Stopped. You said the money belonged to Victor Salazar. Holding it. Dante turned back to look at her. For the first time, something crossed his face that she couldn't categorize. That, he said, is a conversation for a different night. He left. The 6 men outside disappeared. The lights came back on 40 minutes later. Elena sat at her kitchen table until the sun came up, staring at her brother's signature on a document she didn't fully understand, and tried to figure out how the person she loved most in the world had become a complete stranger. She called in sick to work the next morning. She spent the day going through every bank record she had access to, not Julian's. She didn't have access to his accounts, but hers the joint account they'd shared for emergencies when their mother was ill, the old savings account, still technically in both their names from when they were teenagers. Every trace was clean. Julian hadn't touched any of it, which meant he hadn't run out of desperation. He'd planned this. She thought about the brother she knew, the one who called her every Sunday without fail, who drove 4 hours to help her move apartments without being asked, who'd cried at their mother's funeral in a way she hadn't, ugly, unrestrained, without any concern for how it looked. Julian was many things. He was not, she had always believed, dishonest. She was revising that belief in real time, and it felt like something breaking. By Thursday afternoon, she'd made a decision, not because she trusted Dante Moretti. She didn't trust him at all. She'd have had to be delusional to trust him, but because the alternative was waiting in her apartment for Victor Salazar's men to get tired of looking for Julian. She called the number that appeared on a card slipped under her door sometime in the night. A man answered. Not Dante. Someone else who simply said, tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. pack for a week. She packed for 2. Dante's operation was housed, at least partly, in a building on the north side of the city that from the outside looked like a mid-size financial consulting firm. The name on the glass read Vantage Group. She'd walked past it once. She was almost certain without a second thought. The inside was something different. Open-plan offices. Yes. People at desks. Yes. But the security was layered in a way that reminded her of certain government facilities she'd visited during a contract 2 years ago. Facial recognition at the entrance, card access at interior doors, and men standing at certain intervals who were clearly not accountants. A woman named Carla met her at the elevator. Mid-40s, efficient, no nonsense, and someone who'd spent years developing armor. Mr. Moretti will see you at 9, Carla said. Until then, I'll show you where you'll be working. The workspace was a glass-walled office on the 3rd floor with a view of the main floor below. Desk, 2 monitors, a laptop, a locked filing cabinet, stack of folders on the desk with a note on top in someone's handwriting. Start here. Elena sat down. She opened the first folder. It took her 40 minutes to understand what she was looking at, and when she did, she had to put the folder down and sit very still for a moment. The transactions were beautiful, in the way that terrible things sometimes were. Whoever had constructed this financial shell network had genuine talent. 8 layers of shell companies across 4 jurisdictions. Fund movements timed to coincide with legitimate transfer windows. A dozen different account names that recycled components from real registered businesses. Sophisticated, patient. The work of someone who had spent years on it, and running through it like a thread she couldn't have seen if she hadn't known what to look for, was a pattern in the transaction timing she recognized. Not the structure, the rhythm. She'd seen that rhythm before. In her brother's grad school thesis, Julian had built a hypothetical model for disguising capital movement, a purely academic exercise, or that's what he'd told her when he'd asked her to proofread it 3 years ago. This wasn't hypothetical. She closed the folder before anyone could see her face. She told herself to stay calm. She told herself there was an explanation. She told herself she was pattern matching onto something that wasn't there, because her brain did that under stress, because she was looking for connections that would make this make sense. But she knew her own brother's work, and this was his. At 9 a.m., she sat across from Dante Moretti in an office that gave nothing personal away, no photographs, no degrees on the wall, no objects that told you who he was when no one was watching. He asked her what she'd found in her first review. She told him the network was sophisticated, multi-layered, and that it would take time. She didn't tell him about the rhythm. The money was moved 6 months ago, Dante said. Julian built the path, and then someone used it, someone inside this organization. I need to know who. Elena looked at him. Someone inside. Yes. You're telling me your own people are stealing from you. From Victor, technically. Which is why this needs to be resolved quietly and quickly. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, Ms. Voss. I'm asking you to read numbers. You're exceptionally good at reading numbers. How do you know that? Because I read your file before I came to your apartment. He didn't look apologetic. 3 years at Halcott Forensic. 2 whistleblower cases that never went public. because your work was absorbed into settlement agreements. A government contract in 2021 that's still classified. You have a particular gift for finding things people have worked very hard to hide. She hated that he knew all of that. She hated more that she was sitting there listening. I want one thing clear, she said. Go ahead. I find what you're looking for. I do the work. The debt is cleared and I leave. Clean. No other obligations. Dante studied her. Agreed. And while I'm here, I have access to my phone. I can contact people. I'm not a prisoner. You were never a prisoner. Something in his tone made her think he meant it. You can leave this building whenever you want, Miss Voss. Victor's people are the ones keeping you from leaving the city, not me. She thought about that for a long time after she went back to her desk. She thought about it while she worked through the folders, while she traced transaction chains and rebuilt the timeline, while she tried to find the internal source the way Dante wanted her to, and simultaneously tried to understand what her brother had built, and why, and for whom. By late afternoon, she had the beginning of an answer, and it was worse than nothing. The shell network Julian had designed wasn't just moving money. It was moving money in a specific direction toward accounts that, when she traced them through 3 layers of misdirection, resolved into a single holding entity, an entity she didn't recognize. But the registration date was 18 months ago, and the initial deposit was small and unremarkable, the kind of seed amount you'd use to establish legitimacy before moving real money. She photographed the documents with her phone, quietly, when no one was looking. Then she kept working, and she kept her face perfectly, carefully neutral, and she went home to the apartment Dante's people had arranged for her, a furnished 2-bedroom on the 6th floor of a building 4 blocks from the Vantage Group, and she sat on the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room, and she tried to figure out whether her brother was a criminal or a victim or something in between that she didn't have a word for yet. Her phone buzzed at midnight, an encrypted message, unregistered number, the kind of routing she recognized from a security briefing she'd attended 3 years ago. She opened it. 4 words. That was all. We need to talk. Stared at the screen. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. She typed back, Julian. The response took 47 seconds. Don't trust Dante. He knows what happened to our father. Phone went dark. The number was already gone when she tried to trace the routing. Elena sat in the dark bedroom of a stranger's apartment, in the middle of a city she'd lived in her entire life, that suddenly felt like foreign territory. She realized that she had been asking the wrong questions since the moment Dante Moretti walked through her door. She'd been asking whether Julian was guilty, whether Dante was dangerous, whether Victor Salazar's men were watching her building. She hadn't been asking about her father. She hadn't let herself ask about her father because Robert Voss had walked out of their lives 11 years ago without explanation, leaving a note that said, "Only I'm sorry," and nothing else. And she and Julian had spent the better part of a decade constructing the version of that story that hurt least, that he'd had a breakdown, that he'd been ashamed, that he'd loved them, and simply hadn't been able to stay. She'd believed that story the way you believe something you need to be true. Now she was sitting in a dark room, wondering if her father hadn't walked away, wondering if he'd been pushed, wondering how long Dante Moretti had known her family's name before the night he brought $8 million to her kitchen table. And she understood, in that moment, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that the 72 hours had never been about repaying a debt. It had never been about Julian's theft or Victor's missing money, or even her own particular skill with financial forensics. Someone had placed her in this building deliberately. Someone had wanted her inside this operation, and she still didn't know if that someone was Julian or Dante, or someone she hadn't identified yet. What she knew, the only thing she knew with certainty, was that she was going to find out. She set her phone on the nightstand, screen down. She lay back on the unfamiliar bed and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and made herself breathe slow, and even the way her father had taught her once, a long time ago, when she was 8 years old and scared of something she couldn't name. She was scared now, but she was also, underneath the fear, something else. She was paying attention in a way she hadn't been since the night she'd walked into her first forensic case and realized that money always left a trail, that no matter how careful someone was, No matter how many layers they built, the numbers always eventually told the truth. Someone in Dante Moretti's organization was bleeding him. Her brother had built them the tools to do it. Her father had disappeared 11 years ago, and no one had ever explained why. The numbers would tell her. They always did. She just had to stay alive long enough to read them. She didn't sleep. That was the truth of it. She lay there until 4 in the morning, with her eyes open, and her mind running the same loops over and over. And somewhere around 4:30, she gave up on sleep entirely and sat at the small desk in the corner of the unfamiliar bedroom with her laptop open and a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink. Started with her father's name, Robert Voss, forensic auditor, 14 years, with a mid-size firm called Aldrich & Crane before he left or was let go. The records weren't precise 18 months before he disappeared. She'd looked into this before, years ago, in a grief-adjacent phase, where she'd needed to understand what had broken him. She hadn't found anything then, but she'd been looking for a man falling apart. She hadn't been looking for a man who'd found something dangerous. She pulled up the Aldrich & Crane registration records through a public database she'd had access to since her Halcott days. Firm had dissolved 6 years ago. Standard wind down. Nothing flagged. But one of the listed partners, a name she almost scrolled past, stopped her cold. Marcus Vale. She sat very still. Read it again. Marcus Vale, listed as a junior associate at Aldrich & Crane during the same period her father had worked there. Not a partner, not senior, but there. She wrote the name on the notepad beside the laptop, underlined it once. She didn't know who Marcus Vale was yet. The name had the quality of something that mattered, the way certain numbers did before you fully understood why a weight to it that her brain registered before her reasoning caught up. She closed the laptop at 5:15 and stood at the window, watching the city go gray with the early light, and thought about her brother, who had apparently built an $8 million financial pipeline and then vanished, and who was now sending her encrypted messages from somewhere she couldn't locate, and who apparently knew something about their father that he'd never told her. She'd spent 11 years being the older sibling, the stable one, the one who filed the taxes and renewed the insurance, and called their mother every Sunday, even when their mother no longer always recognized her voice. She'd built her whole identity on being the person who kept things together, while Julian was the one who fell apart. She was beginning to wonder if she'd had it exactly backward. At 6 a.m. she dressed, went downstairs, and walked the 4 blocks to the Vantage Group in the thin morning cold. Carla was already at her desk. She looked up when Elena badged through, expression neutrals, and said nothing. Elena went to the elevator. 3rd floor, glass-walled office. The folders were exactly where she'd left them. She sat down and opened the second folder in the stack. She worked for 2 hours without stopping. The transactions were complex enough that she had to build a running map on a legal pad, boxes and arrows, account numbers abbreviated to their last 4 digits, dates circled in red. The rhythm she'd noticed yesterday was still there. Julian's fingerprints all through the architecture. But there was something else now. Something she'd missed yesterday because she'd been focused on the construction and the content, rather than the content, the outgoing transfers. They weren't going to Victor Salazar's accounts. Not directly. They were going through a maze, yes, but when she traced the maze forward instead of backward, they resolved somewhere she hadn't expected. They resolved back into Vantage Group accounts. Dante's own ledgers. She set down her pen. Someone was stealing from Victor, using Julian's pipeline, and depositing the money back into Dante's operation, which meant either Dante was behind it, using Julian as a cutout, framing the theft as external, or someone inside Dante's organization was running a play that Dante didn't know about. She thought about what Dante had told her. Someone inside my organization moved the money. He'd said it like a man who was genuinely looking for the source, like a man who didn't know. Either he was telling the truth, or he was the most convincing liar she'd ever encountered. Given the company she was apparently keeping, the second option wasn't negligible. She was still staring at her legal pad when the office door opened without a knock. The man who walked in was not someone she'd seen before. 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of contained physical presence that came from decades of keeping yourself ready for something. He wore his suit well, but not comfortably, like clothes chosen for a role rather than preference. He looked at her with flat, assessing eyes and closed the door behind him. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I'm Marcus Vale. I run operations for Mr. Moretti." Elena kept her face exactly where it was, kept her pen in her hand, kept her breathing even. "I know who you are," she said, which was not entirely true yet, but was about to become more true very quickly. Vale sat down across from her, without being invited. He looked at the legal pad. She flipped it over before she'd consciously decided to. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker, fast and controlled, and then it was gone. "Mr. Moretti wants a progress report," Vale said. "I'm collecting them this morning. Can ask me himself. He's occupied." Vale's voice carried the particular texture of a man who was accustomed to being the intermediary, the gatekeeper, the one who decided what reached Dante and what didn't. "It's a routine check-in. Where are you in the review?" Elena looked at him steadily. "Early stages. The network is layered. This takes time." "How much time?" "As much as it takes to do it right." Vale studied her. She had the sensation, not pleasant, of being rid of someone looking at her and seeing more than she wanted them to see. "You found something," he said. "I told you. Early stages. You flipped that notepad over when I walked in." She met his eyes. "Habit. My work isn't for general circulation." The silence between them had weight. Vale sat back very slightly, a fractional shift in posture that said he'd noted her, categorized her, and wasn't finished with her yet. "Of course," he said. "Take the time you need." He stood. "If you find anything significant, report it through me. Mr. Moretti's schedule doesn't accommodate direct interruptions." He left. The door clicked shut. Elena turned the legal pad back over and stared at his name, written in her own handwriting at the top of her notes from the night before. Marcus Vale, Aldrich and Crane. Same firm as her father. Same period. Marcus Vale, Operations Direct, Vantage Group. Marcus Vale, who had just walked in here without a knock and told her to route everything through him, picked up her phone, went to the contacts Dante's people had given her, and found the direct line. Not Vale's relay, Dante's direct line, she dialed. Picked up on the second ring. "You need to come to the third floor," she said. Now a pause. "I'm in the middle of something." "I know. Come anyway." Another pause, shorter. 15 minutes. He made it in 11. He came alone, which she hadn't expected, and he closed the door the same way Vale had, but differently, with the ease of someone who owned the room, rather than the wariness of someone performing authority. He looked at her, then at the legal pad, then back at her. "Tell me," he said. She turned the pad around and slid it across the desk. She watched his face as he read it. Dante Moretti had an exceptional face for not showing things she'd noticed that immediately, but his eyes moved through her notes with a speed that confirmed he understood financial architecture. He wasn't having someone translate this for him. He was reading it himself. His jaw tightened. Barely. "Enough. The money is cycling back," he said. "Into your accounts." "Yes. Which means either you already know about it, or someone inside your organization is using your ledgers as a laundry." She paused. "Vale was here this morning." Dante looked up. "He said you sent him for a progress report. He told me to route everything through him." Dante said nothing for a moment. His stillness had a different quality than Vale's, not the stillness of someone condemned to themselves, but the stillness of someone who had just recalibrated. "I didn't send him," Dante said. The words dropped into the room and sat there. "Think so," Elena said. Dante straightened. He folded the legal pad, a precise, unhurried fold, and placed it inside his jacket. "Continue working," he said. "Don't discuss your findings with anyone. Not Carla, not the floor analysts, no one. And Vale? Leave Vale to me." "That's not reassuring." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not warmth, but something adjacent to it, an acknowledgement. "No," he said. "I don't suppose it is." He left. She watched through the glass wall as he crossed the main floor, exchanged 2 words with a man near the east stairwell, and disappeared. The man near the stairwell picked up his phone immediately after. Elena turned back to her work. Her hands were not shaking. She was a little surprised by that. She spent the rest of the morning going deeper into the accounts, and the deeper she went, the worse it got. The cycling wasn't recent. It went back 14 months, long before Julian had accessed the transfer account, long before the $8 million had moved. Someone had been running this operation for over a year. Julian's involvement was late stage, almost grafted onto a structure that already existed, which meant Julian hadn't built this. He'd accessed something already in motion. The question shifted. She'd been asking how Julian had constructed this pipeline. Now she was asking who had handed Julian the keys. She ate a sandwich at her desk that Carla brought up without being asked, a gesture that Elena chose to interpret as Carla's own form of surveillance. She nodded thanks. Carla left without speaking. At 2 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed. Not the encrypted app. The regular message line. Unknown number. Local area code. You should know they moved him last night. He's not where you think he is. She typed back. Who is this? Someone who doesn't want you to end up like your father. She sat with that for a long moment. Where is Julian? She typed. I can't tell you where. I can tell you why. He wasn't running from Moretti. He was running toward something. He found out what happened to Robert Voss, and he didn't know what to do with it. What happened to my father? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then ask Moretti about the Aldrich and Crane audit, the one that never got filed. The message thread went dark. The number, when she tried to call it back, returned a disconnected tone. Put the phone in her desk drawer. She pressed her palms flat on the desk and breathed. An audit that never got filed. Aldrich and Crane, where her father had spent 14 years, and where Marcus Vale had worked at the same time. An audit her father might have prepared. An audit that, if it had been filed, would have what? Exposed something? Ended something? Gotten a forensic accountant killed or disappeared, or just quietly erased. She thought about the note her father had left. I'm sorry. 2 words. The kind of note a man wrote when he didn't have the luxury of explanation. When someone was watching. When leaving fast was the only option. She thought about Julian, who had found this same thread somehow and pulled it, and who was now wherever they'd moved him last night. She went back to the accounts. She dug for Aldrich and Crane. Took her 40 minutes because the connection was indirect, a consulting invoice, buried in a batch of routine expenses from 4 years before Vale had officially joined Vantage Group. But once she found it, the connection was unambiguous. Vale had been billing Dante's operation long before he was officially on the payroll, going back 9 years. She sat back and stared at the screen. 9 years. Before the Shell Network. Before Julian. Before the $8 million. Marcus Vale had been embedded in Dante's financial operation for 9 years, billing through a consulting entity that had since dissolved, pulling small amounts on a regular enough schedule that they'd blend into the noise. He'd been there when her father was at Aldrich and Crane. He'd been there when her father disappeared. She was looking at someone who had been running a very long, very patient game. She was now sitting inside it. She heard raised voices from the main floor below. She looked through the glass. 2 of Dante's men, she'd learned a few names in the past 2 days. Rodriguez near the entrance. A younger one, they called Pace, were facing each other near the center of the floor, in the particular physical posture of men who are 2 degrees from swinging. Rodriguez was pointing. Pace was shaking his head with the rigid control of someone who had been accused of something and was trying not to react. Then Vale walked through the far door. Both men straightened. Confrontation collapsed into nothing, but the residue of it hung in the air even through the glass. Vale looked up. He looked directly at the glass wall of her office. She held his gaze. She didn't look away. He held it for 3 seconds, then crossed the floor and went through a door she hadn't been through, the one marked authorized only at the end of the east corridor. Elena pulled up her legal pad. She added 3 lines. Then she photographed the pages again, the same way she'd done the night before. And this time, she sent the image to an email address she'd created on a clean app 3 years ago for exactly this kind of contingency, the kind of address nobody knew about, connected to nothing with her name on it. She wasn't sure what she was protecting against. She just knew that everything she'd found in the past 48 hours lived in this building, and that buildings could be compromised, and that the only thing she controlled was where the information went. At 4:30, Dante appeared at her office door. He didn't sit. He stood with his hand on the door frame and looked at her with the expression of someone who had spent the last several hours confirming something unpleasant. Vale left the building 2 hours ago, he said. He's not responding to contact. Elena absorbed this. That's fast. He's been in this operation for a long time. He knows the protocols. A pause. You rattled him this morning. I didn't do anything. You flipped the notepad. Something that might almost have been dark amusement crossed his face. Came to me afterward. Told me you were uncooperative and possibly concealing findings. He recommended reassigning the review to an in-house analyst. Of course he did. I told him no. Dante moved into the room and sat, this time in the chair against the side wall rather than across the desk, a different angle, as if he were done with the formality of the desk between them. What did you find on him? She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned the legal pad around. She watched him read. His face gave almost nothing away. That was consistent. She was building a vocabulary for the small muscular compressions around his eyes and jaw that replaced what other people did with their expressions. The jaw tightened again. Both eyes this time. His hand, resting on his knee, made a brief and barely visible fist. 9 years, he said. At least. The early invoices might go further back. I'd need access to older archives. He told me he'd been with us 4. Dante's voice was very flat, very controlled. He told me he'd audited the firm before I brought him on, that the consulting work was preliminary due diligence. It wasn't, no. He set the notepad on the desk. It wasn't. She hesitated. Then there's something else. Told him about her father, about Aldrich and Crane, about the name overlap. She kept it factual, clinical, the way she'd learned to deliver findings that had personal weight. You put the information in front of people before you let yourself feel what it meant. Dante listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she started to wonder if he was going to deflect. Then he said, I knew your father. The room went very still. Robert Voss worked an audit for a company I had interest in. This was 11 years ago. He found irregularities not in my accounts, in the accounts of someone adjacent to my operation who I trusted. He met her eyes. He came to me directly. That was unusual. Most auditors file and disappear. He came to me personally and told me what he'd found because he believed I didn't know. Elena's throat was tight. And did you know? A beat. I believed him. I told him I would handle it. I told him to sit on the audit until I did. He paused. He disappeared before I could. And you didn't, she stopped. You didn't look for him. I looked. Something crossed his face that she couldn't categorize. Not guilt, exactly. Older than guilt. Something that had calcified over time. I found nothing, which meant whoever took him was inside my organization and had access to my resources. At that point, I didn't know who to trust. I went quiet. I protected what I could. And the siblings of the auditor, who disappeared. Did you protect them? The silence stretched. I was aware of you and Julian, he said. I made certain you weren't touched. You made certain. She heard her own voice, very careful, very level. For 11 years you were aware of us. And you never, she stopped again. Started again. You never thought we deserved to know what happened to our father. Dante looked at her. His expression was the most honest it had been since she'd met him, not open, not warm, but stripped of the performance. Just a man who had made a choice 11 years ago and had been living inside it. I didn't know what happened to your father, he said. I knew someone in my organization was responsible. I didn't know who. Telling you would have put you in the same position he was in. And now, he said, I think I've known for some time that it was Marcus Vale. And I think Vale knew that I was getting close. And I think Julian found the same thread your father found because Julian is his father's son, and Vale moved him. The word landed in Elena's chest like something physical. Moved him, she said. Julian isn't with Victor Salazar by choice, Dante said. He never was. Victor didn't recruit him. Vale handed him to Victor to get him out of the way. The world she'd been building, in her head, Julian, the betrayer, Julian the runaway. Julian, the criminal, shifted on its axis, and she felt the shift in her body before her mind caught up. Her hands were cold. Her vision was slightly too sharp the way it got, when her nervous system was running ahead of her. The message I received, she said, this morning. Someone told me Julian was moved last night. Said he wasn't where I thought he was. Dante's eyes sharpened. What number? Local area code. Disconnected when I called back. She paused. They told me to ask you about the Aldrich and Crane audit. The one that never got filed. Dante stood. He moved to the window, not her window, the narrow one on the north wall that looked down onto the street. He stood there with his back to her, and she could see in the set of his shoulders that something had changed, that the calculation he'd been running had reached a new variable. "Vale is moving faster than I thought," he said. His voice had a different quality now. Not cold was his default, but tight, like something coiled. If he's reached out to Victor about Julian, it means he's consolidating. He's not running, he's executing. Executing what? Dante turned from the window. He looked at her with eyes that were entirely, uncomfortably direct. "When Victor and I finalized our transfer arrangement 8 months ago, there was a succession clause. Standard in operations like this, a failsafe in case of leadership change. If I become incapacitated or incarcerated, control of the transfer doesn't revert to Victor. It passes through a designated intermediary." He paused. "Julian put your name on that document." Elena heard the words. They made syntactic sense. The meaning took a moment longer to arrive. "Julian named me," she said. "In a succession agreement that he had no legal right to modify." Dante said, "Yes. Which tells me someone told him to. Someone who knew that if your name was on that document, your presence inside this building would give them leverage over me, over Victor, over the entire transfer." She stood up. The chair scraped back and she didn't register it. "Vale told him to do it," she said. "That's my conclusion, yes. So I was never here because of the debt." She heard her voice from a slight distance. "I was never here because Julian stole the money. That was a mechanism, a way to get me inside." "Yes, and you knew." A pause. "I suspected. When I saw Julian's name on the succession document, I understood that someone had orchestrated it. I didn't know who yet. When I came to your apartment, I knew that bringing you here was risky, but I also knew that leaving you outside was more dangerous." He held her gaze. "I made a calculation, Ms. Voss. Elena." He looked at her. "My name is Elena," she said. "You've known my family for 11 years. I think we're past Ms. Voss." Something in him shifted. A small thing barely visible, but it was there. "Elena," he said, "I brought you here because you were already in the crosshairs, and I still believe, that you are the only person who can find what Vale has buried before he finishes what he started." She stood in the glass-walled office, with the city going dark outside, and her father's ghost, somewhere in the numbers she'd see 2 days reading. And she understood with complete, terrible clarity that there was no version of this where she walked away clean. Julian was in Victor Salazar's custody because Marcus Vale had put him there. Her father had disappeared 11 years ago because he'd found the same trail, and she was standing inside the operation that had consumed both of them, holding the only map that might lead anywhere. She looked at Dante. "Where are the older archives?" she said. "The ones that go back further than 9 years. He studied her for a moment. Then he moved to the door and held it open. "I'll take you there myself," he said. The archive room was 3 floors underground. Elena hadn't known the building went that deep. The elevator Dante used required a key that he wore on a separate ring from his regular access card's older brass, the kind of physical key that existed precisely because it couldn't be cloned digitally. He said nothing in the elevator. She said nothing either. The car descended with the particularness of something built. Before speed was the priority, and she counted the seconds and thought about her father walking into a room like this, finding something, and never walking back out. The archive was not what she expected. She'd imagined filing cabinets, maybe a server rack. What she got was a room the size of a small apartment, climate-controlled, with shelving along 3 walls, and a long central table under fluorescent lighting that gave everything the color of old paper. Boxes, numbered and dated. A terminal in the corner that was not connected to the main network she could tell by the single Ethernet port capped with a dust cover that had not been touched in a long time. Dante moved to the shelving on the east wall. He found a box without hesitating, which told her he'd been here recently and had already been looking. He set the box on the table and opened it. "These are the Aldrich and Crane files," he said. "The ones I collected after your father disappeared. I pulled everything I could access without triggering attention." Elena looked at the box, then at him. "You've had these for 11 years. "Yes. And Vale didn't know. Vale doesn't have access to this level." He paused. "Or he didn't. I'm operating on the assumption that everything I believed about my security protocols needs to be revisited. She sat down at the table and pulled the first file toward her. The Aldrich and Crane material was dense internal correspondence, billing records, draft audit reports in various states of completion. Her father's handwriting appeared on the third page. She turned. Marginal notes in the precise and slightly cramped style she remembered from the homework he used to check when she was young. Her chest did something she didn't allow herself to acknowledge. Kept reading. It took her 35 minutes to find it, not because it was hidden, because it was disguised as something routine, a footnote in a billing reconciliation. 3 lines that would have meant nothing to someone who didn't know how to read the architecture around it. Her father had flagged it with a small pole mark in the margin, the kind of mark you'd make if you were trying not to draw attention to what you'd found. She read it twice. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling. "What?" Dante said. He was standing at the far end of the table, watching her. "The money veil was moving through Aldrich and Crane," she said. "It wasn't going to Victor Salazar." "I know. I established that." "It wasn't going to Victor originally," she said. "That came later. In the beginning, 11 years ago, it was going somewhere else." She turned the file around and pushed it down the table toward him. It was going into a trust account, a private holding structure. She tapped the page, registered to 2 beneficiaries. Dante looked at the document. His face went very still. "Those names," he said. "Julian Voss and Elena Voss," she said. "My father found money being moved into accounts in our names." "In our names, Dante. We were children. Julian was 19. I was 22. We had no idea." The room was very quiet. "Someone was building a case," Dante said slowly. "Building a paper trail that would make it look like Robert Voss was embezzling through client accounts and filtering the money to his own children. And when he found it, he understood what it meant." She heard her own voice, very flat, very careful. He understood that someone had set him up, that the audit he was preparing, the one that never got filed, would have exposed the setup. But once he filed it, they could flip the narrative, make it look like he'd fabricated the findings to cover his own theft. "So he couldn't file," Dante said, "and he couldn't stay." She pressed her palms on the table. "He left because staying would have destroyed us. If he'd been arrested, if those accounts had been discovered with his name attached to the movement, Julian and I would have been implicated. We were beneficiaries on the documents. We were adults." The silence stretched. "He protected you," Dante said. She didn't answer that. She couldn't. She picked up the file and kept reading because it was the only thing she could do with her hands that didn't feel like falling apart. The next 40 minutes uncovered the architecture of it in full. Vale had constructed the false trail over 3 years. Slow, patient, meticulous the way all of his work was. She was understanding now the patience of a man who thought in decades rather than quarters. Robert Voss had been selected specifically because he was good enough to find the real irregularities and honest enough to feel compelled to report them. The trap required someone principled, someone who couldn't be bought. She thought about her father and the kind of man he'd been, and the fact that his integrity had been the precise tool used to destroy him. She was still sitting with that when the terminal in the corner chimed. Both of them looked at it. It chimed again, then a third time. Dante crossed to it in 4 strides. He moved the dust cover off the Ethernet port and stared at it, and she watched something change in his posture, a sudden controlled tend that radiated outward. "This terminal isn't networked," he said. "I know, which means the signal is local." He turned. "Someone in this building is pinging this room." Elena was already on her feet. She thought about Vale, who had left the building 2 hours ago, or who they believed had left the building. She thought about Rodriguez and Pace, the confrontation on the main floor. She thought about the man Dante had signaled near the east stairwell, who had immediately picked up a phone. "We need to leave," she said. "Not yet." Tay moved back to the shelving. He reached behind a row of boxes and removed something she hadn't expected, a thin laptop, old model, clearly kept here separately from the main system. He opened it. The screen was already on. Battery apparently maintained on a rotation. "Kept a separate system down here," she said. "I keep several things separate," he said. He typed without explaining what he was doing. She watched the screen over his shoulder. He was accessing a camera feed, not the building's main system. A secondary one she hadn't known existed, routed through a different server. The images were grainy and time-stamped. He pulled up the archive room entrance. Corridor outside, empty. He pulled up the east stairwell. Empty. He pulled up the parking level. Two men she didn't recognize, moving toward the service elevator. He pulled up the main floor, and she grabbed the edge of the table. Marcus Vale was back in the building. He was standing in the center of the main floor with four men around him that she'd never seen, not Dante's people, not in bearing or in the way they positioned themselves. Vale was talking to Rodriguez. Rodriguez's posture was wrong, too rigid, too still, the posture of a man standing at gunpoint without a gun in sight. Came back, she said. He never fully left. Dante's voice was quiet. He went to collect something. On the screen, Vale reached into his jacket and removed a phone. He looked at it, then looked up, directly at a camera that Elena hadn't known was there. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he smiled, and it was the most terrible thing she'd seen in days. He knew about the secondary camera system. Of course he did. He'd been inside this operation for 9 years. Dante closed the laptop. He looked at her. The files, she said, we need the files. Take what you can carry. She grabbed the Aldrich and Crane box and pulled the most critical materials, the flagged documents. Her father's notes, the trust account records, the billing reconciliation with its penciled margin mark. She folded them and put them inside her jacket, against her body, the way she'd seen someone do once in a film and had thought was melodramatic. Didn't feel melodramatic now. Dante was already at the door. He had the brass key in his hand and was listening at the door before he opened it. He eased it open. The corridor beyond was empty. The service elevator at the far end had its light on ascending. They went for the stairs. The stairwell was a maintenance shaft, bare, concrete, the kind of space that existed in the architectural drawings and was never meant to be used regularly. Their footsteps were too loud. Dante went first, moving with a controlled speed that ate up the stairs, without sounding like running. She matched his pace and focused on her feet and the documents against her ribs, and not on the ascending elevator they'd left behind. They came out on the second floor. Dante stopped, listened. From above third floor, her office, she heard voices. 2, maybe 3 people moving through the space. A drawer being opened. Something heavy set down on a hard surface. They're in your office, Dante said quietly. They won't find anything. I cleaned it before we came down. He looked at her. She looked back. It was the first moment she registered, that she'd done that instinctively, that she'd photographed and cleared her notes before they'd gone to the archive, without Dante telling her to. Without anyone telling her to, because some part of her had already been preparing for the possibility of exactly this. Her father's daughter then, whether she'd wanted to be or not. They moved through the second floor to the west stairwell, which was a different shaft, not connected to the main elevator bank. Dante took them down one flight and through a door she'd never seen open, a corridor she hadn't known existed, running parallel to the loading bay. They came out through a fire exit onto a side street, a full block from the building's main entrance. Cold hit her face. She exhaled and watched the breath disappear. Dante had his phone out. He typed something. Waited. His jaw was set, and his eyes were moving, clocking the street, the roof lines, a car idling at the far corner. Car is 2 minutes, he said. Where are we going? Somewhere Vale doesn't know about. He paused. There are fewer of those than I'd like. The car came in 90 seconds, not 2 minutes. A dark SUV, a driver she'd seen twice in the building, a man named Croft who drove with the focused economy of someone who had done this before under worse circumstances. Dante got in the front. She got in the back. The car moved before the door was fully closed. She sat in the back seat with her father's documents against her chest and watched the Vantage Group building recede through the window. The lights on the third floor were all on. She could see movement behind the glass of her office. She thought about the terminal chiming in the archive room, about Vale standing in front of a camera and smiling, about 9 years of patient, embedded betrayal, and the long-running game of a man who thought in decades. She thought about Julian wherever he was. Then her phone buzzed. Not the encrypted app, not the unknown local number. Her regular line, and the contact name that came up was one she hadn't seen active in 3 weeks. Julian, she answered before she'd thought about whether she should. L. His voice was wrong, rough, like someone who hadn't slept, or had been doing something that used up the voice. But it was him, unmistakably him. "Elle, are you safe? Where are you?" she said. "I can't, there's no time. Listen to me." The sound of his breathing was too fast. "I need you to listen and not ask questions yet. Julian. Vale has a file on Dante. A real one, not the fabricated accounting. Evidence of things Dante actually did years ago, before he restructured. Vale's been holding it as insurance. If Dante moves against him, Vale burns him to the federal task force that's been building a case for 4 years. A pause, a short one, the sound of someone moving carefully through a confined space. File isn't in the building. Vale never kept it in the building. Where is it? That's what I was trying to find out when they picked me up. His breathing hitched. "Elle, I need you to understand something. The debt, Dante coming to your apartment, I didn't plan that. Vale did. But the succession document, I put your name on that. I know. A beat, you know. Dante told me. Why? Because I needed you inside. Not for Vale. Not for Dante." His voice dropped. "For Dad. I found what he found, Elena. I found the whole thing. And I knew if I went to Dante, he'd protect himself before he'd protect us. And if I went to the feds, Vale would burn Dante. And we'd still never know what happened. And I needed someone inside the organization who Vale didn't already own and who was good enough to find the real evidence before Vale could bury it." A pause. "You were the only person I trusted." She pressed her back against the seat. The car was moving through an underpass, the light strobing. Dante had half turned in the front seat and was listening. She didn't try to hide it. "You used me," she said. Her voice came out flat. Not accusation exactly. Assessment. "Yes," Julian said. "I'm sorry. I didn't know another way. Where is Vale's file?" Julian. "That's what I'm trying to tell you." His voice had a new edge now, the edge of someone who was about to say something that changes the shape of everything. "It's not a physical file. It's an account. A data vault registered under a shell entity that traces back to this is the part you're not going to like." "Tell me." "It traces back to the trust accounts, the ones set up in our names. 11 years ago when Dad found them, Vale closed them, but he didn't destroy the shell structure. He repurposed it. The vault that holds the evidence against Dante is sitting inside a financial entity that legally still has our names attached to it." A pause. "Which means accessing it without triggering Vale's dead man protocol requires authorization from a named beneficiary." The car stopped. They were somewhere a parking structure. Dim, she'd lost track of where they were. "You need me to access it," she said. "I need you to access it," Julian confirmed. "And you need to do it before Vale realizes I've told you. Because once he knows, he'll activate the protocol and the vault burns, and everything Dad found, everything that proves what Vale did, it's gone." "How long do I have?" A sound on his end. Not quite a voice, something nearby, some movement. His breath went sharp. "Julian, I have to go." The words were rapid, compressed. "There's a routing number in the trust documents. Dad left it. He knew someone would find this eventually. The routing number leads to the vault access point. You have the documents, Elena. I know you took them." A fractional pause. "Be careful of Dante." "I mean it. He's not your enemy, but he's not your friend either. He'll protect the Empire before he'll protect you." The call ended. Elena sat holding the phone in a parking structure in the dark, with her father's documents pressed against her chest and the routing number somewhere in the papers she'd grabbed, and the particular cold feeling of understanding that she'd been positioned by Julian, by Vale, by 11 years of a conspiracy she'd had no knowledge of, into a single point of leverage that everyone needed, and no one had managed to reach. Dante turned fully in his seat. He looked at her. "I heard most of it," he said. "I know. Julian put you in here deliberately. He put us both in here deliberately." She met his eyes. "He needed someone inside your organization who Vale didn't own. He used the debt as the mechanism. He used me as the instrument." She paused. "He's not wrong that I was the best person for it. I hate that he's not wrong." Dante's expression moved through something she didn't have a name for. "The vault," he said, "has evidence against you." Yes, she held his gaze. "Real evidence, you said. Which means whatever's in there is something you actually did." He didn't look away. 11 years ago, before I restructured the operation. How bad? A pause. Bad enough that the federal task force would have grounds for a RICO case. "So Vale has you. She heard the steadiness in her own voice and was faintly surprised by it. He's been holding you in place for 4 years with evidence you can't destroy because you don't know where it is. Until tonight, she agreed. She looked down at the documents in her lap and started going through them, page by page, looking for a routing number her father had left, like a map to a room he'd hoped someone would eventually find. She found it on the last page of the billing reconciliation. 9 digits, written in pencil at the bottom margin. So light, it was almost not there. The way you'd write something, if you were trying to make it look like a smudge, like an accident, like nothing. She held the page up. Croft in the driver's seat kept his eyes forward. Dante leaned back and looked at the number, then at her. If I access the vault, she said, I can pull the evidence. All of it. What Vale has on you, what my father compiled, the entire 11-year record. She kept her voice steady. But if I pull it, I control it. Not you, me. The silence in the car was the densest thing she'd ever sat inside. You're negotiating, Dante said. There was something in his tone that wasn't anger, closer to recognition. I'm establishing terms, she said, because Julian was right about one thing. You'll protect the Empire before you'll protect me. I need to know that whatever I pull from that vault, you don't get to make it disappear. Not the part about my father. Not the part about what Vale did, even if the rest of it burns you. Dante looked at her for a long time. Long enough that Croft shifted almost imperceptibly in the front seat. Agreed, Dante said. I need more than that. What do you need? I need Julian, out of wherever Vale is keeping him, before I touch that vault. Because the moment I access it, Vale knows. And the first thing he'll do is make sure Julian can't talk. Dante pulled out his phone. He typed a message. Waited. The response came in under 30 seconds. He turned the phone to show her. Salazar compound. East wing, 2 guards on the door. She read it. Read it again. Your people know where Julian is. I've had people looking since the day I discovered. Vale handed him to Victor. He held her gaze. I didn't tell you, because I didn't have a plan for extraction that didn't end in a firefight I couldn't control. And now Vale is in my building, going through my files, burning whatever he can access before I can stop him. Dante put the phone away. Victor will know that Vale's play has moved to the endgame, which means he'll move Julian tonight, probably. Then we're out of time. We have been for a while, he said. He turned to Croft. North Channel. Tell Reyes we need 4 people and 30 minutes. Croft picked up a radio. Elena sat with the routing number in her hand and looked at it. 9 digits her father had written in a parking garage of a moment she was only now arriving at, 11 years later, and understood that everything that was about to happen would happen because Robert Voss had been principled enough to find the truth, and smart enough to leave the trail, and brave enough to disappear rather than let it consume his children. She thought about the note he'd left. I'm sorry. Not a breakdown. Not shame. An apology to people who would someday understand why he'd had no choice. She folded the page carefully and put it inside her jacket, separate from the others, closest to her. Then the SUV moved, and the parking structure fell away behind them, and the city opened up, dark and cold and entirely indifferent, and Elena Voss held her father's last message against her heart and let herself become, for the first time, exactly the person. This situation required her to be not the stable one, not the careful one, not the older sibling who kept things together while other people fell apart. Something sharper than that. Something that had been waiting inside the numbers and the documents, and the 11 years of not knowing, coiled and patient, the way all the most dangerous things were. The car hit the bridge, and the lights of the city streaked past, and somewhere across town a man named Marcus Vale was standing in her office, and believing he had already won. And he was wrong, and she was the reason he was wrong. And she had approximately 1 hour to prove it before he figured that out. The bridge ended, and the city swallowed them whole. Croft drove without headlights for 2 blocks, which should have frightened her and didn't, which told Elena something about how much the last 72 hours had recalibrated her sense of what was normal. She sat in the back with the routing number in her jacket, and her father's handwriting behind her eyes, and watched Dante work his phone in the front seat, not frantic, never frantic, but with the compressed urgency of a man dismantling and rebuilding a plan in real time. He made 4 calls in 8 minutes. She caught fragments. North side, The Reyes team. Victor's East compound. 30 minutes. Not more. The last call was different, shorter, quieter, and when he ended it, he sat for a moment before he turned around. Vale has taken the 3rd floor, he said. He's locked out 2 of my senior analysts, and he's running a wipe protocol on the main server. Can he wipe the secondary system? The one in the archive. The archive terminal wasn't networked. A pause. But he knows it exists. He'll send someone physical. How long before they reach it? 20 minutes. Maybe less. She did the calculation. The archive was 3 floors underground. The documents she'd taken were the critical ones, the Aldrich and Crane materials. Her father's notes, the trust account records. But the secondary terminal held transaction logs that went back further than the paper files. If Vale's people wiped it, a decade of evidence disappeared. I need to go back, she said. Dante turned fully. No. The terminal is already compromised. Going back puts you inside a building Vale controls. His voice was flat. I'm not sending you back in there. I'm not asking you to send me. She held his eyes. I'm telling you I'm going. The silence in the car had a particular quality, the quality of a man reassessing someone he thought he'd already assessed. The Reyes team is going to the Salazar compound, he said carefully. For Julian, I know. I'm not asking you to change that. She kept her voice even. I'll go to the building alone. I need 20 minutes on that terminal. The logs will tell me exactly which federal accounts. Vale flagged for his Deadman protocol. When I access the vault, I need to know which threads to pull, so the whole thing doesn't collapse into a file that burns you without burning Vale. Dante stared at her. She could see him working through it, not emotionally, not the way most people weighed risk, but with the cold mechanical precision of a man who had survived a long time by being honest with himself about odds. Croft goes with you, he said finally. Croft is your driver. Croft is considerably more than my driver. He glanced at the front seat. Stay with her. Get her in and out. Croft said yes, sir, without any particular inflection, the same tone he'd have used if Dante had said, take the 9th Street exit. Dante got out of the car at the next block. A second vehicle, she hadn't seen it approach, was already waiting. He transferred without looking back, and she watched the second car pull away and disappear. And then it was just her and Croft and the city and the 20 minutes she'd told herself she had, which she was increasingly certain was optimistic. Croft drove 2 blocks east and parked in an alley behind a dry cleaning business. He turned off the engine. He turned around. He was younger than she'd registered, mid-30s, maybe, with a face that had been rearranged at some point. A scar along the left jaw that spoke to something she didn't need details about. Side entrance, he said. Loading dock. I have an override card for the secondary access panel. We go down the service stairs. He paused. If we encounter anyone, you keep moving. Don't stop for anything. And you? He looked at her steadily. I stop. She nodded. She didn't ask him to elaborate. They went in through the loading dock. The override card worked. She heard the panel click and the door swing open with the slow hydraulic exhale of a fire door. And then they were inside, in a service corridor that smelled of concrete and recycled air. And Croft moved ahead of her with the particular controlled stride of a man who was doing something he'd trained for, specifically, and didn't need to think about. The service stairs, 3 flights down. Her calves were burning by the bottom. She was not, had never been, the kind of person who ran, and the stairs were steep, and they were moving fast, and her body was registering the demand, even as her mind refused to acknowledge it. The archive door. She had the brass key. Dante had pressed it into her palm before he'd gotten out of the car, without a word, and she'd understood what it meant. Put it in the lock and turned it and pushed through. The room was exactly as they'd left it. Climate-controlled air. Fluorescent light. The terminal in the corner with its dust cover back in place, which meant Vale's people hadn't reached this level yet. Crossed to the terminal. Uncapped the Ethernet port, stopped. Looked at it. If I plug in, she said, it signals my location. You've got maybe 6 minutes before it matters, Croft said from the door. He was watching the corridor. Do what you need to do. Plugged in. The terminal woke up immediately. The password was already entered. Dante had logged in before they'd fled, and the session was still active. She navigated to the transaction logs and started pulling. The logs were organized by year, then by account. She went backward from the current date. 9 years of Vale's embedded billing, the same pattern she'd found in the paper records, but with more granularity, exact timestamps, IP addresses, authorization codes. She copied everything to a portable drive she'd pulled from the laptop bag Carla had packed for her 3 days ago, which she'd carried every day since, because she was the kind of person who carried things she might need. 3 minutes in, the terminal chimed. Not the soft chime from before. A sharp, repeating alert. She looked at the screen. Someone had remotely accessed the building's secondary server, the one this terminal connected to, and was running a deletion protocol from the outside. Files were disappearing in real time, the log entries vanishing in reverse chronological order, like something being erased from the present backward into the past. They're wiping it remotely, she said. How much time? She watched the deletion progress. It was moving fast, automated, not manual, which meant Vale had built this into his exit protocol long ago. It would reach her target files in approximately 90 seconds. She didn't try to stop the deletion. She copied faster. The drive's transfer rate was good. She'd bought it specifically for high-volume work. And she concentrated on the account clusters she needed most, the ones that traced Vale's dead man protocol, pulling them in batches while the deletion crept toward her from the front of the log. 50 seconds. 50-40. The deletion reached the cluster adjacent to hers. 30 files gone in 4 seconds. She pulled the drive. The terminal screen went gray, then black. Then a single line of text that stayed for a moment before that too disappeared. Protocol complete. She stood up. Her legs felt strange, not weak, but oversensitized. Every tendon aware of itself in a way that was going to become pain later. Not now. Later, Dunn. Croft said. Enough. She held up the drive. Enough to work with. They went back up the service stairs. Her phone buzzed. On the second landing, she pulled it without stopping. Dante, Reyes is at the compound. Julian is confirmed in East Wing, beginning extraction. Then 5 seconds later, Victor knows. He's been tipped. She stopped on the landing. Croft looked back. Victor knows Reyes is coming, she said. Croft said something under his breath that she didn't catch. How? Same way Vale knew everything. She started moving again. Someone tipped him. Someone in Dante's contact chain who is still running to Vale. They came out through the loading dock. The alley. Cold air, the smell of garbage and diesel. Croft had his phone out, talking quietly, moving toward the car. She was halfway across the alley when the door at the far end opened. 2 men. She recognized neither of them, but she recognized the way they moved, the way Croft moved. Actually, the same economy of motion, the same orientation toward her, as if she were the center of a calculation, and she understood before either of them spoke that this wasn't Dante's people. Croft moved in front of her. Get behind the car, he said. His voice hadn't changed. Same flat professionalism. Now she moved. She heard rather than saw what happened next, a brief, violent exchange that lasted less time than she'd have believed possible. The sound of impact, and someone's breath leaving them hard, and a metallic clatter that might have been something dropped. She made herself keep moving, reached the car, pressed her back against the rear panel. Silence. Then Croft's footsteps unhurried. Get in. She got in. He got in. He had a cut above his left eye that was bleeding into the eyebrow, and he drove without mentioning it. Are you fine? He said. One word. She stopped asking. He drove 3 blocks north before she could breathe properly, and then her phone rang, not a text, a call, and the contact name stopped her cold. Vale. She stared at the screen. Croft glanced in the mirror. She answered. Ms. Voss. Vale's voice was exactly as she remembered. It contained professional, the voice of a man who had spent decades performing reasonableness. I hope this isn't an inconvenient time. She said nothing. I'll take the silence as a no, he said. I'll be brief because I think we've all had a long day. You have something I need. I have someone you care about. I'd like to propose an exchange. Julian isn't yours to exchange. He is for another few hours. A pause. Victor is a patient man, generally. He becomes considerably less patient when he feels his hospitality has been abused. And the people I just sent to collect you have apparently failed to do so, which is an abuse. Another pause. I'm running short on goodwill to spend on your brother's behalf. You're calling me because Dante has you cornered, she said, kept her voice level. You're in his building. You've wiped what you could reach. And you know I walked out with the Aldrich and Crane files. You need the routing number. A silence. Shorter than she'd expected. You're very like your father, Vale said. He was direct too. It was the thing I respected most about him. A beat. And the thing that made him impossible to work with. Her grip on the phone tightened. She felt it in her knuckles. You killed him, she said. I made a difficult decision. His tone didn't change. He was about to file a report that would have dismantled something I'd spent 8 years building. I made the decision that needed to be made. The car was moving. Croft was watching her in the mirror. She looked back at him and held up one hand, keep driving, and he kept driving. The routing number, Vale said. The vault access. You bring them to me. Julian walks out of the Salazar compound in 1 hour. Dante gets what's left of his organization and a reason to leave me alone. Everyone survives. And the evidence against you stays inside the vault, he said. Sealed, I keep access. Call it a mutual deterrent. You want me to hand you the key to a vault that lets you hold Dante indefinitely and buries what you did to my father. I want this to be over, he said. In my experience, over is worth more than just. You're a practical woman. Think you understand that? She looked out the window. A cross street, a traffic light, the city running its ordinary night, indifferent to all of it. Give me an hour, she said. 45 minutes, Vale said. I'll send you an address. He ended the call. Croft said, Dante needs to know about this. Dante already knows. He has the line monitored. She pulled up the message thread. Text was already waiting from Dante, I heard. Don't go. She typed back, tell me another option. His response took 11 seconds. Working on one. You have 44 minutes, she sent. Then she put the phone in her jacket and looked at the drive in her hand. The vault access. The routing number. Her father's meticulous 9-digit trail to evidence that implicated Vale in murder, fraud, and the systematic destruction of 2 people's lives. Evidence that also, sitting alongside it in the same sealed space, implicated Dante in things she didn't know the full shape of and didn't need to in order to understand they were serious. She'd told Dante she needed to control what came out of that vault. He'd agreed. The agreement was verbal, in a car, between 2 people, neither of whom was particularly accustomed to trusting anyone, which made it worth exactly as much as the moment they were in when it was made. Plugged the drive into her phone. She opened the copied logs. She found the dead man protocol cluster the accounts. Vale had flagged to trigger automatic federal disclosure if accessed without his authorization, and she stared at it for long enough that Croft said her name quietly from the front seat. I'm thinking, she said. Think faster, he said, not unkindly. She found what she was looking for in the third account cluster. The dead man protocol had 2 triggers, Vale's authorization, which would seal the vault, and a second trigger, buried in the architecture the way her father had buried his routing number, so lightly written into the structure that you'd have to know to look for it. Secondary authorization, a beneficiary override, the trust accounts in her name and Julian's. If a named beneficiary accessed the vault, the dead man protocol suspended for 72 hours, long enough to pull the evidence, long enough to hand it somewhere Vale couldn't reach. Julian had known this. Julian had put her name on the succession document not just to create the mechanism that brought her into Dante's organization, he'd put her name on it. Because her name was already on the underlying structure. Because her name was the key her father had built into the system before he disappeared. Robert Voss had not just left a routing number. He'd left her a door. Her eyes were burning. She pressed the back of her hand against them. For a moment, hard, and made herself stop. Her phone lit up. Dante Reyes hit a problem. Victor repositioned Julian to the main house. 24 men. Then Vale's people are leaving the building. He's consolidating somewhere. Then, 30 seconds later, a message that came from a number she didn't recognize, but that had the syntax of the encrypted app Julian had used. L. Whatever you're going to do it now. I can hear them moving outside. She looked at the drive, at her phone, at the routing number written in her father's handwriting on the folded page inside her jacket. She looked at Croft. I need a location with a stable connection and no Vale exposure. Somewhere your network controls. He thought for 2 seconds. There's a relay point 6 blocks north. We use it for secure transfer ops. Vale doesn't know about it. It postdates his active involvement by 3 years. Take me there. He drove. She prepared. She pulled up the vault access protocol on her phone, used the routing number to locate the entry point, and sat with her finger over the authorization field, and did not enter her name yet, because the moment she did, the clock started, and she needed to be somewhere stable when she pulled the contents, and she needed Julian somewhere safe before Vale understood what she'd done. Dante's message came at the 4th block. I'm going to the compound myself. She typed back, don't. Julian is my responsibility. Julian is my brother. She hesitated, then added, trust me for 40 minutes. Doesn't work? Do whatever you need to do. The longest pause yet. Then, 40 minutes. The relay point was a room above a laundromat. She would have laughed at the cliché if she'd had anything left for laughing. A single room, a rack of equipment, 2 monitors, a connection speed that her phone confirmed was clean and fast and isolated from any network Vale could touch. She sat down. Croft stood at the door. She entered her name in the authorization field. Screen changed. A progress bar. A confirmation. Then beneficiary override accepted. Dead man protocol suspended. 7200. The vault opened. She started pulling files, and what she found in the first 4 minutes was worse and more complete than anything she'd been prepared for not just Vale's evidence against Dante, not just the record of her father's death, but a file she hadn't known to look for, a file that had been sitting in the vault for 11 years, sealed, waiting, titled with her father's case number, and annotated in a hand she recognized from the documents, her father's. Robert Voss had made it to a terminal before they'd found him. He'd uploaded everything he knew. The full audit. The complete trail. 11 years of it, sitting in a sealed vault under her name, waiting for the moment she arrived. She downloaded it all. Every file. The evidence against Vale. The evidence against Dante's earlier operations. The complete audit her father had compiled. And 3 additional files she didn't have time to read yet, but that her instincts told her mattered. She transferred it all to the encrypted account she'd created 3 years ago, the one connected to nothing with her name on it. Then she attached the most critical files, the Vale evidence, her father's audit, the trust account records, to a draft email addressed to a federal contact she'd worked with during her 2021 government contract, a woman who had handed her a card and said, if you ever find something the system needs to know about, and had meant it. She did not send the email. She saved it as a draft. Then she called Vale. He answered in 2 rings. Voss, you're 3 minutes early. I have the vault access, she said. I have the files. I have everything your dead man protocol was built to protect. Silence. Controlled, but heavier than his previous ones. And I have the federal disclosure package ready to send. She continued. Everything on you. The Aldrich and Crane audit. My father's complete file. The 9 years of billing records that prove you've been running an embedded operation against your own employer. She paused. I also have the transfer logs that prove you handed Julian to Victor Salazar and framed it as a voluntary defection. You're negotiating, Vale said. His voice had changed. The performed reasonableness was still there, but stretched thin over something harder underneath. I'm establishing terms. She heard her own voice and thought, distantly, that she sounded like Dante. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Julian walks out of the Salazar compound in the next 20 minutes. Dante's people escort him. You don't interfere. Victor doesn't interfere. Nobody moves against anyone during the transfer. And in exchange, I don't send the email in the next 20 minutes. She kept her voice flat. After Julian is clear, we talk about the rest. Another silence. You're bluffing, he said. If you send that file to a federal contact, it takes Dante down with me. Yes, she said. It does. Then you won't send it. I don't know Dante well enough to be certain I won't. She meant it, and she let him hear that she meant it. I know my brother. Get him out. She heard Vale breathing. 3 seconds. 5. Victor won't be cooperative, he said. Victor is going to have significantly larger problems in about 6 hours when those transfer logs hit the task force's desk, she said. He knows that. Tell him. The silence stretched to 10 seconds. 15. 20 minutes, Vale said. I'll make the call. She ended the call. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking, finally. Now that it was done, the shaking arriving late, like a weather event that had been building offshore for days. She pressed them flat on the desk and breathed. Croft was looking at her from the door, with an expression she couldn't fully read, not awe, exactly, but the specific regard of someone recalibrating what they thought they knew. Dante's going to want to know what's in those files, he said. I know. She picked up her phone. He's going to have to ask me. She texted Dante. Vale is calling Victor. Julian should be moving in 20 minutes. Get Reyes to the east perimeter. The response was immediate. Already there. What did you give Vale? She looked at the phone. At the draft email, sitting in the account no one knew about. At the 71 hours and 43 minutes left on the beneficiary override before the vault sealed again. Time, she typed back. I gave him 20 minutes. His response took longer this time. She could almost feel him reading the space between the words. Then, and the vault? She held the phone and thought about her father writing 9 digits in pencil at the bottom margin of a billing reconciliation that sat in a box for 11 years, waiting for someone who knew how to read it. Thought about Julian, who had found the same thread by a different route and had made choices she didn't agree with and couldn't fully blame him for. She thought about Dante, who had known her family for 11 years and had made his own calculations about what to tell them and when, and who was not wrong to protect himself, but who was also, she was increasingly certain, not lying when he said he hadn't known who had taken her father. She thought about the email draft, the federal contact's address, files sitting there, ready, waiting for her decision about what kind of ending this was. She didn't send it. She didn't delete it either. The vault is open, she typed. I have everything. We need to talk about what happens next. And Dante, you don't get to decide that alone. She set the phone down. The drive was in her pocket. The email was in a draft folder. Her father's audit was in an encrypted account. And Julian was, if Vale kept his word, 20 minutes from walking out of a compound he'd been held in for weeks. And Marcus Vale was somewhere in the city, having just understood that the woman he'd planned to use as a pawn had accessed the vault he'd spent 11 years building and had not burned him yet, which meant he was going to move fast with everything he had left. She looked at Croft. He's not going to wait for the 20 minutes. No, Croft agreed. He's going to try to reach Victor directly. Probably already has. Her phone lit up, not Dante, not Julian, not Vale. An unknown number, but the text was 3 words, and they landed in her chest like 3 separate impacts. They took Dante. She was already standing, already reaching for her jacket, already calculating where Vale would have people, where Dante would have been vulnerable in the window between his message. And now, which of his own men had still been running to Vale even after tonight? Croft had his hand on the door. He looked back at her. She held the phone and understood that the vault and the email and the 20-minute window she'd negotiated meant nothing. Now that Vale had moved to his final position, the one where he took the board entirely, and that the only move left was the one she hadn't prepared for, the one that required her to stop calculating and act in the way her father had been unable to act, and Julian had acted badly, and Dante had spent 11 years acting from behind the armor of his empire. She had the files. She had the routing number. She had 71 hours on the beneficiary override and a draft email and a federal contact who had meant it when she said, if you ever find something, and she had exactly nothing left to lose. She sent the email, not the full package, not yet. She sent one file, the transfer log showing Vale's 9-year embedded operation, clean and specific and impossible to misread to the federal contact's address, with a single line of text. I have the rest. Call me in 2 hours or I send it all. Then she put the phone in her jacket and looked at Croft. Where would Vale take him? She said. Croft didn't hesitate. There's a warehouse on the South Freight Corridor. Vale used it twice before off-book, not in the building's records. Dante had it flagged as a possible exposure, but never moved on it, because he trusted Vale enough not to. Yes, take me there. Croft drove, and she sat in the back and did not let herself think about what Vale's people would do with 20 minutes, and a man who knew too much and had no remaining use as a bargaining chip now that she'd accessed the vault without his terms. She thought instead about the email. About the federal contact, a woman named Sato, Patricia Sato, who had the kind of face that said she'd been waiting a long time for a case that was worth the effort. About what Sato would do with transfer logs at 11:30 on a Thursday night, which was probably nothing until morning. But the existence of the email was the point, not the timing. Vale knew the vault was open. He knew the files existed. He needed to know she'd pulled the trigger before he killed Dante, because a dead Dante changed. The calculus turned this from a manageable exposure into a federal homicide case, the kind that moved fast and had no elegant exits. She was betting on Vale being smart enough to understand that. She was betting on a man who'd spent 4 years holding evidence over someone's head, understanding exactly what it meant when someone else picked up the same weapon. The warehouse was 12 minutes away. She used 11 of them. The building was a former cold storage facility, long, low, with loading docks on the east face, and a series of side doors that had been chained and padlocked at some point, and had the chains cut at some point after that. No lights on the exterior, the kind of darkness that was deliberate. Croft parked 2 blocks out. He looked at her in the mirror. "I have 2 people I can reach in 8 minutes," he said. "We don't have 8 minutes." "No," he agreed. He reached under the seat and came up with something she didn't look at directly, and got out of the car, and she got out behind him. The east loading dock, a side door. Croft tried it and it opened, which was wrong. Doors in places like this were locked, and unlocked doors meant either the people inside didn't care about being found, or they were expecting someone. She touched Croft's arm. He stopped. She pointed at the door. He looked at it, then at her. She mouthed, "Expecting us." Thought for 3 seconds. Nodded once. He went left along the exterior wall. She went right, around the corner, to a second side door that was locked with a padlock on a chain, which she studied for a moment before noticing that the chain was looped, but not latched, the padlock hanging open. The whole thing arranged to look locked from a distance. She slipped the chain, eased the door. Inside, the smell of cold concrete and machine oil, and the particular staleness of a building that circulated bad air. Some ambient light from emergency strips along the ceiling, green-tinted and dim, enough to see the large open floor of the former cold storage facility. Metal shelving along the walls, mostly empty. Cabling on the floor. The far end, near the loading dock, 3 figures. 2 standing, 1 seated. She moved along the inside wall, in the shadow of the shelving, and got close enough to see faces before anyone saw her. Dante was in the chair. His jacket was gone, his shirt torn at the collar, a cut above his eye that mirrored Croft's in a way she might have found darkly funny in a different life. His hands were behind him. He was conscious. She could see that in the set of his body, the specific tension of a man who was injured and contained and still calculating. 1 guard to his left, 1 to his right. Vale was not there. She stood in the shadow and tried to locate Vale in the building by sound or movement, and came up with nothing, and then understood that Vale wasn't here because Vale had sent people and was somewhere else, somewhere clean, somewhere with distance between himself and what was about to happen. And the realization settled in her like cold water, because it meant the people here had instructions, and Vale was waiting for confirmation. The guard on the left moved. He stepped toward Dante and said something too low for her to catch, and Dante said something back, equally quiet, and the guard hit him, open-handed, controlled, not rage but task, and Dante's head turned with it and came back, And his expression when it came back was absolutely nothing. That nothing was the most frightening thing she'd seen in 4 days. She needed a distraction. She needed Croft. She needed 8 minutes she didn't have. Her phone was on silent. She opened it, typed fast, east wall. 2 guards, Dante and chair. Vale not here. Go on my signal. She waited 30 seconds. Her heart was doing something she couldn't control, a rapid and insistent percussion in her chest, and she breathed through it the way her father had taught her, slow and even, stared at Dante across the dim floor, and thought about what he'd said about her father. I looked, found nothing. I went quiet, and I protected what I could. He'd protected them, imperfectly, inadequately, and from a distance, but he'd protected them. Croft's response came back, ready. She stepped out of the shadow.
Yep.
She didn't run. She walked the specific walk of someone who intended to be seen, who was choosing visibility as a statement rather than a mistake. She watched the guards register her, watched them shift, watched the one on the right reach for something summing at his hip. Don't, she said. Her voice carried in the empty space. I just sent transfer logs to a federal agent. Your names are in those logs. If I don't make a call in the next 15 minutes, everything else goes with it. The guard on the right stopped. The one on the left looked at her, and then at Dante, and then back at her, with the specific expression of a man running a calculation he hadn't been given the variables for. Dante looked at her. His expression shifted barely, only the eyes, only the tightening around them that she'd learned to read. Ms. Voss, he said. His voice was steady. Of course it was. You should not be here, I know, she said. She kept moving. She stopped 10 feet from the chair, in the open, both guards in her peripheral vision. Call Vale, she told the guard on the left. Tell him she's here, and she's already filed. The guard didn't move. Your choice, she said. But the 15-minute window is not a bluff, and I have a federal contact who is going to read that email in the morning and trace everyone whose name is in those logs, and your names are in those logs. The guard on the left reached for his phone. Croft came through the loading dock door behind them. What happened next took less than 40 seconds, and she kept her eyes on Dante through most of it on his face. The way it stayed controlled and present, the way he tracked each movement in his peripheral vision without turning his head. The sounds were not pleasant, and she filed them away to be processed later, or not at all. When it was done, Croft was breathing harder than usual, and both guards were on the floor, and Dante was still in the chair, with his hands still behind him. Crossed to him. She looked at the restraint zip ties, thick ones, and looked at Croft, who produced a blade from somewhere and cut them. Dante's hands came forward. He brought them into his lap and looked at them. For a moment she saw the marks the ties had left, the redness at the wrists, and then he looked at her. The 15-minute window, he said. 12 minutes now. Did you actually file one file? Enough to start the clock. She held his eyes. Vale is going to get a call from his people in about 2 minutes. When he does, you need to already be moving, because if he decides the exposure is uncontainable, he burns everything at once, including you, including the federal task force file he's been holding. Dante stood. He did it without visible effort, which she suspected was performance, and she respected it because she understood it. He straightened his shirt where it was torn. He looked at Croft. He looked at her. Where's the vault? He said. Safe, she said. Not with you, not yet. Something moved in his eyes. Not anger. Elena, 12 minutes, she said. Move. They went out through the side door. Cold hit all 3 of them, and Dante's breath clouded in the air, and she watched him absorb the temperature without comment, which told her the cut above his eye was the worst of it, which was better than the alternatives. Her phone rang at the car. Vale. She answered on speaker. Croft was already driving. You filed, Vale said. Not a question. 1 document, she said. I have the rest. You understand what happens when I send the full package to the task force. I understand that you go down with Dante if you do. She kept her voice level. I also understand that the file my father compiled, the one that's been sitting in the vault for 11 years, has your fingerprints on 3 separate murder investigations that have never been closed. Not Dante's, yours. Personally. A silence longer than any of the previous ones. You read it, he said. I read enough. She paused. You're not holding a weapon anymore, Marcus. You're holding evidence of your own crimes, and you've been calling it leverage for 4 years. She heard him breathing, heard faintly the ambient sound of wherever he was, indoor quiet, the controlled environment of a man who had spent decades curating controlled environments. What do you want? He said. It came out differently than his previous questions, less composed. The question of a man who had run out of positions. I want you to turn yourself in. She said it plainly, without drama. Tonight. Before the task force reads that email tomorrow morning and comes looking. You walk in yourself. You get the choices of what narrative you bring with you. She paused. My father deserves a record. A real one, not a cold case. You're the only person alive who can give that to him. The silence stretched. She counted the seconds. 8, 9, 10, and Dante, Vale said. That's between Dante and the evidence, she said. That's not my decision. She felt Dante's eyes on the side of her face from the passenger seat. She didn't look at him. And if I don't, Vale said, then Sato reads her email in the morning with everything in it, including my father's complete audit and the murder files, and you lose the narrative entirely. She paused one final time. You built your whole career on controlling the story, Marcus. This is the last time you get to choose what the story says. She ended the call. The car was quiet for a moment. Then Dante said, that won't hold him. It doesn't need to hold him, she said. It needs to hold him for 6 hours. She sent the second email to Sato, not everything, but the murder files from her father's audit, specifically the 3 cold cases. Then she texted Sato directly, check your email. Don't wait for morning. The name is Marcus Vale. Then she put her phone down and looked out the window and let herself be exhausted for the first time in 4 days. They found Julian at a gas station 2 miles from the Salazar compound at 1:17 in the morning. Reyes's people had gotten him out during the window she'd bought with Vale's phone call. 20 minutes of Victor's people standing down, confused, waiting for instructions that Vale had been too busy to send. Julian had walked out through the east perimeter with Reyes on one side and a second man on the other, and then he'd sat on the curb outside a gas station in the cold and waited. When she got out of the car and walked toward him, he stood up. He was thinner than 3 weeks ago. There was bruising along his left jaw that had gone yellow at the edges, old enough to be healing. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing an apology and had understood on the way to delivering it that words were going to be inadequate. She didn't give him the chance to try. She put her arms around him and held on, and he made a sound against her shoulder that was not quite language, and she pressed her face into his collar and breathed him in. He smelled like other people's rooms and fear-sweet, and underneath that, faint and familiar like himself, and she held on until the sound stopped. Then she stepped back and looked at him. You're in a lot of trouble, she said. I know, he said. We're going to have a very long conversation. I know. Not tonight. No, he agreed. He looked past her at the car, at Dante, who had gotten out and was standing at a slight distance with the particular stillness of a man who understood when he wasn't part of something. Julian looked at him for a moment, and then back at Elena. It's complicated, she said. Julian looked at her face for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I can see that. Marcus Vale turned himself in at 4:48 in the morning. Elena found out from Sato, who called her at 5:15 and asked, in a voice that was professional and controlled, and only slightly shaded with the disbelief of someone who had received an unexpected gift, whether Elena was available to come in. She said yes. She said she'd need an attorney present, and Sato said of course. She ended the call and sat in the chair by the window of the hotel room. Croft had arranged not the Vantage Group apartment, not her own apartment, somewhere clean and unmapped, and watched the city come light. The meeting with Sato lasted 6 hours and took 3 separate sessions over 2 days. Elena brought everything. The vault files, her father's audit, the trust account records, the billing reconciliation with the penciled margin note, the transfer logs, the copied terminal data from the drive. She gave Sato the complete history of it in chronological order, starting with Robert Voss at Aldrich and Crane 11 years ago, and ending with a warehouse on the South Freight Corridor the night before. She also gave Sato the evidence against Dante. She'd told him she would, the morning after the warehouse, in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel, over 2 cups that they'd let go cold. She'd set it on the table between them, a printed summary, 2 pages, clean and specific, and watched him read it. He'd read it without expression. He'd put it down. I expected this, he said. I know. He looked at her. What I did in those years, I'm not going to tell you. It wasn't what it was. I'm not asking you to. She picked up her cup. Cold. She drank it anyway. I'm telling you, because I said I would. What you do with it is your decision. He sat with that for a moment. Then you could have used it. Against Vale. Against me. You had the vault. Yes, she said. Why didn't you? She looked out the window at the street. A woman walking a dog. A delivery truck blocking half the lane. The absolute ordinary persistence of the city carrying on. Because using it the way Vale used it would have made me Vale, she said. And I'm not Vale. I'm my father's daughter. She paused. He could have run with the audit. Could have sold it. Could have used it to protect himself instead of filing it. Sane. He didn't. He left it in a vault and disappeared. So Julian and I wouldn't be implicated. She brought her eyes back to Dante. I'm not disappearing. But I'm not using the evidence as a weapon either. Dante was quiet for a long time. The task force, he said finally. They'll build a case. Probably. It'll take years. RICO cases take years. He said it without bitterness, which was the thing that surprised her. I've already begun the restructuring. The legitimate operations are clean. I had them audited by an outside firm 8 months ago, before any of this. I know. I found the audit in your files. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. The ghost of it. Of course you did. The task force will do what it does, she said. Can't control that. I gave Sato what I have and I told her what I know. She paused. I didn't tell her everything. He looked at her. The vault has files I haven't shared, she said carefully. Files that are old enough and specific enough that prosecuting them would cost more than it recovered. I made a judgment call about what the public interest required and what would just. She paused, searching for the word reopen wounds without healing anything. That's not your decision to make, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. But I made it anyway because someone had to. She met his eyes. You can be angry about that. I'm not angry, he said. And she believed him, which was one of the stranger things about that morning. He stopped. Started again. Your father was a better man than most people I've known. Yes, she said, he was. The silence between them had changed over 4 days. It had started as the silence of a threat, and had become something else, not comfort, nothing as simple as that. But the silence of 2 people who had seen each other in circumstances that removed the usual distance. The Vantage Group, he said. The legitimate operations. I need someone to run the financial oversight. He said it carefully, with the tone of a man who understood he was asking something that required a particular kind of answer. I know, she said. That's not a yes, it's not a no either. She looked at her cold coffee. Ask me again in a month. He nodded. He didn't push. Marcus Vale entered a plea agreement 6 weeks later. The negotiation was long and involved several attorneys, and the kind of institutional back and forth that moved in weeks and months rather than days, and Elena followed it through Sato's periodic updates without attending any of it in person. The 3 cold cases her father had documented were reopened. 2 of them had enough surviving evidence to proceed. The third did not, which Sato told her, with the careful tone of someone delivering a partial answer to a question that deserved a complete one. Lena received that information on a Tuesday morning at her desk, her own desk, in her own office, which she'd returned to 3 weeks after everything, because the work existed regardless of what else was happening, and because the routine of it was the only thing that kept her brain from running the loops that 4 days of sustained crisis had grooved into it. She sat with it for a few minutes. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. Julian spent 2 months working through the legal consequences of his involvement, not criminal charges. Ultimately, because his cooperation with the task force and the documented coercion by Vale built a record that the prosecutors were willing to accept as context. There were civil matters, financial restitution, the kind of long tail that attached itself to choices made under pressure and didn't fully resolve for years. He handled it with a steadiness that surprised her. And then she realized it probably shouldn't have surprised her that Julian had always been steadier than he appeared when something real required it, and that she'd spent a long time confusing his emotionality for fragility. He called her every Sunday. She always answered. Their father's record was officially amended 5 months after Vale's plea. The cold case notation was removed. The audit he'd compiled was entered into the federal record as supporting evidence for the Vale case, with his name attached, not as a suspect, not as a person of interest, but as the original source, the forensic accountant who had found the thread 11 years before anyone else did. Elena received a copy of the amended record in the mail. A formal document, government letterhead, her father's name correctly placed in the correct category. She read it standing at her kitchen counter, and then she set it down and put her hand flat on it, and stood there for a while. She didn't cry. She thought she would, had braced for it, and then it didn't happen, and she understood that grief didn't always work on the schedule you expected. Cry later, probably, or maybe not. Maybe what she felt was too specific for crying the particular feeling of a wrong being named. Finally, by the right authority, in the right language. Her father had known the truth would eventually tell itself. He'd built the vault. He'd left the number. He'd trusted someone would find it, even if he couldn't stay to be the one. She folded the document carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept things that mattered. Dante called her in the 6th week, not to ask again about the Vantage Group. He called on a Thursday evening when she was at her desk, still working, and he said, without preamble, the federal task force has opened a preliminary inquiry. I know, she said, Sato told me. I want you to know that I'm not going to fight it. She set down her pen. What does that mean, specifically? It means I've retained counsel and instructed them to cooperate fully. It means the restructuring I began 8 months ago is going to accelerate. And it means... A pause the kind she'd learned meant he was choosing words with particular care. It means that whatever the process determines, I'm going to let it determine it. She thought about the files she hadn't given Sato, the judgment call she'd made about old evidence and public interest. She'd thought about it many times in 6 weeks, not with regret exactly, but with the awareness that it was a weight she'd chosen to carry. You know I held some things back, she said. Yes, I'm not going to tell you which things, because if I tell you, it changes your calculation, and I made those calls specifically, so they'd be mine. I know, he said. I'm not asking. She looked out her office window. The city, in the early dark of autumn, the lights coming on in buildings across the block, the ordinary texture of a place that had never cared what happened inside it, and was still there anyway. The Vantage Group offer, she said. The financial oversight position. He waited. I'll consult, she said. 3 months. Conditional on full access, no gatekeeping, and a written agreement that anything I find goes where it needs to go, regardless of who it implicates. She paused. Including you. A silence. Agreed, he said. And Dante, she stopped. Started again. If the task force finds grounds, you don't fight it. Even if you could. Even if the restructuring would be enough to argue the case doesn't hold. The silence this time was longer. She heard him breathing. She heard, faintly, the ambient sound of wherever he was. She still didn't know where he lived, had never asked, which struck her suddenly as an interesting gap. Agreed, he said. The second time it cost more. She could hear that it cost more. Picked up her pen. She wrote the date on her legal pad and underlined it. I'll have my attorney draft the consulting agreement, she said. Send me the Vantage Group books for the last 3 years, and I'll review them before I decide anything final. I'll have them sent tomorrow. Good. She ended the call. She sat for a moment with her pen in her hand and her legal pad in front of her, and the city going properly dark outside. Then she went back to work. The debt contract arrived by courier 6 weeks after that. A manila envelope, no return address, the paper inside folded once. The original document, her brother's signature, the 8 million figure, the formal, terrible language of it, with a single handwritten line across the bottom in an angular script she recognized by now. Debt cleared, no obligations remaining, and below that, just his surname. Not a message, not an explanation, just the signature of a man who honored the terms he'd set. She read it once. Then she tore it in half, and tore the halves again, and dropped the pieces in the recycling bin under her desk. She didn't keep it. She didn't need to keep it. The thing it represented the night he'd set it on her kitchen table. The city outside going dark. 6 men around her building, and an elevator opening, and a man who moved through her space, like he'd already calculated. Every exit that night would stay with her, in a way no document could capture or contain. She'd walked into it terrified, and she'd walked out, knowing something she hadn't known before, something that wasn't wisdom, exact, but was adjacent to it. The knowledge that the worst circumstances occasionally produce the clearest version of yourself, and that the clearest version of herself was someone her father would have recognized. She was at her desk on a Friday afternoon when Julian came by without calling first, which he'd always done, and which she'd always pretended to be annoyed by, and never actually was. He brought coffee. He sat in the chair across from her desk, her real desk, the one she'd had for 4 years, the one that had her coffee cup ring on the left corner, and her handwriting in the margin of the blotter, and he looked at her for a moment before either of them said anything. You doing okay? He said. Better, she said. Which was true. The amended record came through for me too, he said. For Dad's case. Sato's office sent it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I read it 4 times. Yeah, she said. I keep thinking about the vault, he said. That he built it. That he knew we'd find it eventually. He looked up. Do you think he knew it would be us? Specifically? She thought about the routing number, written in pencil in the margin of a billing document. The lightness of it, the near invisibility, the mark of someone who understood that the only way to survive was to be findable only by the right people. I think he built it for someone who knew how to read numbers, she said, and we were the most likely candidates. She paused. He taught us both. Julian was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said, for how I did it. I should have told you what I'd found instead of... Yes, she said. You should have. I was afraid you'd tell me to stop. I would have told you to stop, she said, and I would have been wrong. She picked up her own cup. That doesn't mean what you did was right. No, he said. Doesn't. They sat with that not comfortably, not with the ease of resolution, but with the honest discomfort of 2 people who loved each other and had ended up here through a combination of their own choices and other people's cruelty and 11 years of not knowing a thing they should have known, and who were now, finally, on the other side of it. Not healed, not whole. But on the other side, the city outside her window was doing what it always did, indifferent, continuous. Its own vast, ordinary business, proceeding regardless of what any one person inside it had just been through. She'd hated that quality of cities when she was younger, had found it isolating the way the place just went on. She didn't hate it now. There was something sustaining about it. Actually, the way the city didn't require her to have survived anything, didn't mark it or memorialize it, just kept running its lights and its traffic and its early evening noise. And she could sit inside that and be a person who had come through something and was still, simply, here. Julian left at 6. She walked him to the door and watched him go down the hall to the elevator and thought about the boy he'd been and the man he was becoming, and felt, somewhere under the exhaustion and the residue of 4 days that had changed the shape of things, a specific and uncomplicated love for him that had survived everything thrown at it. The elevator closed. She went back inside. She sat at her desk and opened the Vantage Group books that had arrived the week before. The 3 years of records Dante had sent as agreed. She opened the first file and found her pen and pulled her legal pad toward her and wrote the date at the top and underlined it. The numbers were there, the way they always were. Patient exact. Waiting to be read. She started reading.